Hi, this is Paul. I was going to do a little video on a little clip from the Peterson Peugeot thing, just as sort of a way to end the week. And the more I thought about it, the bigger it got. This won't be too big. I want to try and do something short. Part of what I'm always chasing is how to talk about the line. Does the line these men are wavering over, and I'm thinking about Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson, does the line these men are wavering over make a difference? And what's just so absolutely inspiring and delightful about both Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson is how honest they are about exactly who they are and what they think and what they believe. That's very unusual in high status, high profile public figures. How to get at this line? Because in many ways, many of you wonder about this line. So many of my conversations, not only my conversations with Poe, my conversations with many of you who are, well, I'm sort of a mythological Christian. I'm not really, I can't really say I believe in Jesus' resurrection from the dead. I can't really believe that he rose physically and what that means. Just in today's question and answer, I talked quite a bit actually about the physical resurrection and what that means in terms of it doesn't simply mean the body of Jesus. It means that the spirit of Jesus is manifest in physicality and history as history pursues its climax until Christ is all in all. That's what the resurrection means. C.S. Lewis writes about that in his book Miracles. Now, often we talk about becoming a Christian. Okay, well, what does that mean? And especially in the light of the fact that Christianity has so made progress in colonizing our moral assumptions, and even the critics of Christianity use Christianity to criticize, often quite rightly and fairly, the church. Assenting to some propositional truths about history that seems so insufficient so often to be on one side that says I'm skeptical about whether or not Jesus rose from the dead, as Sam Harris bullied Jordan Peterson into saying almost certainly not. Jordan wasn't feeling almost certainly not in his conversation with Peugeot. But it seems in some ways that merely assenting to a historicity of a resurrection is insufficient. And Peterson, in his conversation with Peugeot, bears that out how many times that if this is true, and for Peterson it's a question of the relationship between the narrative and the physical. If this is true, nothing I do, if I really believe this, nothing I do would ever look the same than if I didn't believe it. And this is where you get into Peterson's understanding of we act out our beliefs, and our beliefs are not transparent to us. Just because I've said many times that our beliefs are not volitional, in that we don't choose our beliefs choose us. And so we're formed and framed and deep within modernity, each of us, very much myself included, are deeply materialists, deeply naturalists, deeply skeptical about what, not just, again, as C.S. Lewis mentioned in Miracles, what would happen the first 5 minutes after Jesus, gets clung to by Mary and seen by Peter and all of that, but the idea that the resurrection of Jesus is the physicalizing of the Spirit of Christ throughout history, which is exactly what Tom Holland is writing about. And what Jordan Peterson is struggling on is the reality of the narrative touching down and colonizing reality and colonizing physicality. Somebody just wrote me and said, what Peterson is stuck on is a change of metaphysics. And that's right. Is consciousness first and matter second? Is consciousness derived from matter? But just making a difference and making a decision with respect to the priority of this in our abstract thought is insufficient. In fact, the profession of my faith in the lordship of Christ is in many ways analogous to the profession of the physicality of the resurrection, because what it means is that resurrection is now moving my lips and changing my heart and forming my soul. And if in fact that is the Spirit of God, if in fact that Spirit of God that gets imparted to the apostles on the day of Pentecost, it's the Spirit of God moving and changing the world. Every time you see the bricks and mortar of a church, you can see the physicality of the resurrection on a street near you. Now again, Peterson so passionately and clearly and correctly challenges the witness of the church and says, if you really bore witness to that man that I read about, you would be far more impressive than you are. And that's right. The church continues to struggle. The church continues to stay in a twilight. Part of the image that I kept having of Peterson in this conversation was this moment in, I think it's Infinity Wars, when Thor has to open, of course, these setups in these movie casts are, if you've ever seen Galaxy Quest, they have these chomping things and you have to go through crazy hallways and almost puzzle rooms in order to do something on the ship. So, here are these handles and the full brunt of the star has to go through you, yada, yada. I mean, it's still so totally contrived, but if you try to draw pictures of the book of Revelation, you have exactly the same problem, okay? Things don't necessarily work out mythologically like they do mechanically, all right? So here in this moment, Thor has to open the shutter, as it were, and let the full force of the sun come in so that they can melt the stuff so that his new hammer can be forged, all of that stuff. And you see Peterson wrestling with it because in many ways he recognizes to open this door in his heart, to cross this line, to go on YouTube and say, I believe, and not just to have it be, as mundane and pedestrian as we see Christians every day in the unimpressiveness of it. Peterson understands the stakes. And he rightly sort of pauses because he knows it's a point of no return. A philosophical decision isn't really it. He notes that Christians have been unimpressive to him. The church is unimpressive to him. He feels the potential of what a transformation could enable, and he's exactly right. And again, he's got plenty of experience of intellectual plausibility, plenty of experience. I was listening to one person that was saying, and I hear this often, well, it's the experience. No, it isn't just merely the experience. And I make this point when I preach on the Gospels that Jesus' disciples regularly have intensive, mind-blowing experiences of him when he stills the storm. So the disciples are freaking out in a storm on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is asleep in the boat, and they're probably as annoyed at that. And so they grab him and say, don't you care if we die? And Jesus looks at them like, you guys just don't get it. And he stands up and he stills the storm as if he was taking, as if the disciples were afraid of some Rottweiler, and Jesus says, go sit in the corner. The storm stops and they look at him. People have those experiences all the time. Peter had that experience. Bid me, Lord, come and walk on the water. And he takes a step out of the boat, and then he looks at the wave and sinks, and Jesus, Peter. You can have experiences all day long, but they are not going to stick. The Spirit of Christ physically manifest in the world through the resurrection, through history, through the lame churches and preachers and wobbly Christians, through all of this. The experience alone won't do it, because the moment the experience is done, The rest of the mundane manifest image imposes itself on you. And so the same Peter that looks at Jesus after he stills the storm and saw Jesus multiply the loaves and fishes and walked on water momentarily because Jesus bid him to come, that same Peter loses his faith and denies his faith by a fire when a slave girl asks him. And the Judas who saw these things loses faith probably with Jesus because Jesus isn't living up to his political narrative, and Jesus should be wielding the crowd to storm Jerusalem and take out the Romans. And Jesus is a loser, Judas concludes. Better to cut his losses, take the cash, and go, but then he regrets that too. It's not about the plausibility of a mere experience. You can have mere experience. It is, someone asked recently, or 2 weeks ago in the question and answer, it is a leap of faith. Sometimes you leap and sometimes you just fall because you have nothing else. Of the idea that narrative governs the physical, Lewis writes about this in Miracles. The narrative of my mind governs my hand. Now that gets really complicated because in a lot of ways, the consciousness, and they've got lots of studies about this. I knew I was going to move my hand before my conscious governor told my hand to move. We're that complex mentally, okay? And so it's in that way that, and Jordan knows this, that he's only tangentially in charge of himself, which in some ways makes this wavering on the line so tantalizing, but probably so frustrating because Jordan, the Spirit of God's got to give you a push, baby. Ask for it. Ask and it shall be given. Seek and you will find. Just. And I think that is in many ways the moment of conversion when we go to God and say, I can't jump this gap. Push me. And I think of Lord of the Rings. Gimli says to Aragorn at Helm's Deep, it's too far, I can't jump it. Toss me. And in many ways, when we get to the end of our resources, we have to look at God and say, toss me. But he does toss. And it can be terrifying. And perhaps what we're seeing is the tossing right here and right now played out in real time. Lewis or Peterson, talks about the synchronicities, and I don't know that Peterson needs another psychedelic trip, or he's intimated plenty of times, and if you're well versed with the Peterson corpus, you know the kinds of dreams and visions he has. I've had other people who watch my channel who have other information come and tell me stories of it. This is, some people have a lot of this and some people don't. That's just the way it is. You see it in churches all the time. Peterson's one of the guys who has a lot of it, and it's like, okay, Jordan, are you gonna let go and let him toss you? What really do you have to lose? And Tammy did quite a remarkable conversation with her daughter, and Tammy, I don't know any of these people in real life. I've never shaken Jordan's hand. He'd never introduced me to his wife, but when she tells her story, she didn't have a choice. She knew she was on her way out. And it was life and death, and she knew she had to yield if she was going to be around for her daughter and her son and her grandchildren. And prayer sometimes takes different forms for different people. God meets us where we're at. The first thing I ever communicated to a podcast, it was an English podcast, and God answers misaddressed mail. He does. And so you might not know how to pray. You might not know the words to say. But the book of Romans says he knows your heart. And if you cry out to him, he will answer. Now, that doesn't mean he will give you the solution you may be thinking you need or looking for. Her interview with her daughter is full of yielding examples. Now, some may question, people are going to question everything. This is the internet. So let's be careful about judging and, pray that she continues on her journey that she's going to, and that the Spirit of God take her by the hand. Christians trust Jesus more than they trust themselves, and then we keep fighting him. You see that in church all the time. We keep taking it back. We keep fighting him. But this is the path. This is the way. The other thing on the other side of this is the cruciform path, because Peterson may imagine that if he leaps or falls or asks God to push him, that this will somehow yield, that the experience will be like a vision or a dream or a psychedelic trip or a crazy, dramatic, mystical thing. Sometimes it is for people. I've spoken with a number of people who have experiences like that. Most of the time, it's slow and quiet, because you have to understand Jesus. If most of us were to write a script for Jesus, it would be probably not too dissimilar to what the ancients imagined. They imagined Apollo descending on a golden chariot, something of that nature. And this is exactly the point of the temptations of Christ with the devil that are in the Gospels. The servant isn't above the master. Jesus is the Son of God. And does he win arguments? Jesus, if you've been following my sermons, the land around Jesus is careening in their culture war towards the explosion of 67 to 70 AD that will culminate in the destruction of the Second Temple. Jesus weeps over Jerusalem and says, I can't talk you out of this. You're self-destructive and you're destroying yourself. The Son of God lost his culture war. You have to ask, well, what was the resurrection after? Not just a body that Thomas could touch, but a world in which bit by bit he is transforming by his Spirit at a pace that sometimes is breathtaking, but often is so slow and indiscernible that even great saints have questions and doubts. The path of the Master was not of power over, but power under, and power through suffering. My grace is made perfect in weakness, he tells the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul comes and says, there's this thorn I'd like you to remove. Then the Spirit of God says, no. That's the way of the Master. The servant is not above the Master. Miracles may happen, but as I've said on my channel before, I know people who do miracles, and it's almost always a cruciform path. They pay for the miracles they do for others. It's a substitutionary pattern. The mother brings the child into life through her costly love. The good parent lays down their life for the child day in and day out in small and subtle ways that do not look miraculous, but yet manifest the pattern of the God who was crucified for his people. I talked in today's question and answer about the role of the church. I gave an example of an image of a self-taught clinician. Jonathan repeatedly recommends that Jordan start taking the church seriously. Yes, that church. Think about the story of Elisha and Naaman, the Syrian. Naaman comes in, and he's got leprosy, and he's got a Jewish slave girl. And the Jewish slave girl says, you know that place that you raid, probably where they stole her from? there's a prophet who could heal that leprosy. And so Naaman goes down with all of his treasures, and, he understands how prophets work. You send them a big check and they do what you want. And he gets down there and, keep your money. That Jordan over there, dunk in it 3 times. You'll be all right. Next. He's offended. I've got much better rivers in my hometown than that miserable excuse you call a river. And again, the slave girl says, if he'd asked you to do something really big, you would have done it. This is life and death. Why don't you just humble yourself and listen? That's what the church is. The church is the muddy Jordan. Am I going to go to a church? And C.S. Lewis had the same thing. Am I going to sing terrible songs with bad music and listen to that priest or minister up there who knows far less than I do, droll on and waste my time, and sit here and look around at the other silly people at church who are busy with their own silly games, and there's all the infighting and all the mess that's the church. Am I really going to dunk in that river? If he asked you to do something hard, wouldn't you do it? The only thing dunking in the river, the only way that's hard is because it's humbling. And that's the path. That's the path. It's always been the path. It's the path of humiliation. That's exactly the path that Jesus walks. Jesus says, y'all can't figure this out. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go first and you're going to follow me. But I'm going to lay down all sorts of power and glory and that you didn't have to begin with. And you're going to follow me. So imagine a self-taught therapist, no university degree, no licensing, just a library card. And maybe might have helped a lot of people. But they don't have what someone else might have, the good and the bad, a world of communal imprints living without. How do you know how to be a Christian if you don't get to watch even the bad examples? There's no mutual accountability or support or covering or all those things. And so Jonathan says, lean into that. Get into that muddy river. And yeah, the music might be terrible. The preaching might be ghastly. The preacher might be a lying preacher. But if he told you to do something hard, wouldn't you do it? What this hard is humbling, because what you really need to do is lay down your pride. It's always pride. And it's a loss of autonomy, the most terrifying thing for us to face, especially now as contemporary powerful people who have elevated choice to the top of the hierarchy. I see it all the time as a pastor. People get a bad word from a doctor and they say, well, you've got cancer. You can do chemo or you can do radiation. And someone say, at least you have a choice. Oh, fine choice. No, choice is not the greatest thing in the world by any means. What we do is we lose our autonomy. And that's, of course, exactly what pushed Tammy. All the choices were bad. We become servants and slaves to Christ, and we're humbled again and again. Jordan Peterson is right that many of his slaves are unimpressive. Some are really bad at it, but others just look bad because they're judged in the light of this world, and at some point after the revelation, they will be revealed to have, and they'll be the people, probably not me, the celebrity pastors, the people who everybody knows their name, and it'll be, I can think of a number of them. And they might look unimpressive to you. But when someone needed a meal, they came with a casserole. And when someone ran out of money, an anonymous envelope showed up in the mailbox. And when that little church that really shouldn't be alive still stays alive, because these people are sacrificing and giving way beyond their means, So much so that the IRS has to check up, did you really give that much money away? Because that's way beyond our metrics. And they didn't let anybody know. The book of Hebrews says this world is not worthy of them, and that's true. And for their own sake, the world does not see them and applaud, because the applause of the world is a very dangerous thing. So Peterson's a tough cookie, and he's right there on the edge. I have to tell you, don't play chicken with God. Don't make him push you. Because he does things we don't think are kind, gentle, or responsible sometimes. It costs us everything. But we find rest for our souls. That's what I want for Jordan. It's what I want for you.